Hello and thank you for joining and watching our SD-WAN video. My name is Dion Rice and I'm on the SD-WAN team here at Teneo. I'm going to be talking about building an SD-WAN requirements document and vendor selection. Over the next 20 minutes I'll be discussing a subject that I'm sure is familiar to you and something you may have done before, but specifically in the context of SD-WAN. Before we start, let's just take a very quick look at the SD-WAN journey Teneo has been on over the last few years. Since the start for us in 2011 with Tulare Networks, we now have worked with 5 vendors in live production environments and had many conversations with a host of others. The knowledge that we've amassed across the team at Teneo is extensive, is an asset that we want to share with our customers and prospects as they consider what their SD-WAN journey will look like. We've seen lots of acquisition in this space, with more sure to follow, and a good number of traditional networking vendors developing capabilities in SD-WAN. Our objective at Teneo is to help organizations understand and navigate their way through this very crowded space, so they can make a decision on whether SD-WAN is right for them and which of the many vendors out there will present the best technology and commercial fit for a successful transformation of the network. I hope in this short presentation I'll give you a few things to consider for your journey. My expectation is that a lot of this will be familiar and will be activities you do by default. However, our experience suggests that there are many organizations that are not following some basic steps, which in the context of SD-WAN could negatively affect the potential success of your project. Let's get into it and talk about requirements gathering. New technologies and evolutions of existing technologies are coming along more frequently than ever today. Keeping up is certainly no easy task. The alignment between the business and IT continues to be of crucial importance, as every IT project needs a strong business case with demonstrable total cost of ownership and return on investment, or it's unlikely to happen despite hype from the vendors. SD-WAN is a topic that is well publicized, and there are some very strong statements being made around the benefits. Many of these are true, but as with most things, it's not as black and white as the vendors may suggest. Ultimately, a decision on whether SD-WAN is going to deliver benefits to an organization needs to be made. Reaching that decision has to start somewhere, and in our view, it isn't with vendor selection. Teneo advocates that defining key requirements is the essential first step before the vendor selection process starts, and that these requirements should be categorized into the 4 areas you see on the slide. Working with a partner like Teneo, who has global experience in deploying SD-WAN, can help you capture your requirements efficiently and in detail, which in turn provides a great foundation on which to analyze how the SD-WAN vendors match up against them. So let's look at the 4 areas of requirements that we think you should be focusing on. I would like to suggest that capturing the business requirements should be the first step in your requirements gathering process. All other requirements should then align with one or more of these. Seems completely obvious, and hopefully what you're doing today. But we've seen cases where despite it being obvious, it doesn't happen. For example, networking teams looking at features and functions before fully understanding what the business is trying to achieve. Business requirements can be very generic. For example, who isn't interested in saving money? But others can be very specific to the type of market that your business operates in. Documenting the requirements that are very specific to your business and your business model is essential, and will limit the inevitable distractions from vendors talking about features, many of which may be relevant, but some won't be for your business. Taking time to speak to your various business units, the application owners, the finance department, basically anyone that uses the network is critical, as there will be requirements from everyone that may merit consideration. Whilst you have one network, it will be used by different parts of your organization in different ways, so perspective is key. The business requirements, once captured, will provide the input for all of the other requirements to be validated against. Technical, operational, and security requirements will need to align with these business requirements. Let's take a look at some of these next. In the world of SD-WAN, there's a lot to consider when it comes to features, protocol support, topology, and security as examples. We've seen customers dazzled by vendors delivering long lists of options for things that can be achieved, and different technical solutions to problems. We've seen different language used, or perhaps jargon might be a better term, and different methods to achieve the same outcomes. And as with many things in IT, the promise of simplicity from every vendor. I'll say at this point, this is something that you should definitely take with a pinch of salt. Doing SD-WAN properly is not simple. Transforming your network is not simple, but done right, it's achievable, non-disruptive, and can deliver some huge benefits to your business. When you begin to capture technical requirements, this should be achieved through a process of converting the business requirement into the technical requirement. Avoiding the distraction of lots of technical features that look great but may not have any direct bearing on meeting business objectives is what we believe should be your goal in the early stages. Your technical requirements, once captured, should be discussed in the context of the original business requirements to validate whether the objective is achieved through the technical solution, but also whether it is viable in other contexts. This could include factors such as commercial suitability and operational suitability. For example, do we have the skills? This process of validation is important and will increase the overall success profile of the project by you avoiding taking a path where technical requirements don't align with business objectives, or where the technical requirement is unachievable due to other factors. Moving on to operational requirements. In exactly the same way you would capture and validate technical requirements against the business requirements, capturing the operational requirements is equally critical and follows the same process. These are not operational requirements for the actual project, though. That is a separate consideration. These are the ongoing operational requirements once you start the transformation and move your business to a new SD-WAN. I've put some examples on the slide here, but I'd like to comment specifically on service level agreements. Traditional SLAs for the network involve service credits for loss or degradation of service on your WAN circuits. Often these credits will not be anywhere near compensatory for the actual cost of the disruption, but it is something that the industry lives with, at least for today anyway. SD-WAN introduces options and techniques whereby the WAN can heal itself. For example, this could mean that the packet loss or jitter you have on your link, or indeed the complete loss of your link, is transparent to your applications and your users. The discussion this enables is one of appropriate SLAs for an SD-WAN environment. Whilst it is still prudent to gather statistics on the performance and availability of your MPLS and Internet circuits, and liaise with your service provider around improvements in service credits, there should be a focus on what SLAs you can offer the business with all of the advantages SD-WAN brings. For example, you may have MPLS links instead of Internet links because of the SLA on availability you get from your service provider. But using SD-WAN and multiple Internet links could provide higher availability, save money, and support business objectives. The key takeaway here is that SD-WAN allows you to revisit traditional SLAs and ultimately deliver a higher quality and availability of service to the organization. Lastly, moving to security requirements. SD-WAN opens up a lot of opportunities when it comes to security in your network. It is fair to say that in some of our customer engagements, the security team expressed concerns about whether SD-WAN would weaken their posture, but we believe the reality is to the contrary. For example, by default, SD-WAN traffic travels in encrypted tunnels across the transport layer, invisible to the transport provider network. But beyond the default benefits that SD-WAN should bring, security requirements gathering needs to take into consideration your overall security strategy. You may, for instance, have a strategy to simplify the branch edge infrastructure, and as part of that initiative, be considering to not have firewalls at the branch, instead favoring cloud-based firewalls. SD-WAN can certainly route traffic as required to cloud-based firewalls, and indeed many SD-WAN appliances have inbuilt firewall capabilities which can play a part. Therefore, when considering SD-WAN in the context of security requirements, focus should be given to how SD-WAN vendors interoperate with cloud firewall vendors and also perhaps their service chaining capabilities. Thinking about security from a strategic point of view and aligning existing objectives with SD-WAN should not be underestimated. Getting this right can certainly lead to greater levels of security, cost savings, and lower complexity. Equally, getting this wrong by not capturing the requirements and ultimately choosing a vendor that doesn't align with objectives will likely increase vulnerability and exposure to threats. We get asked a lot about certifications and standards. What I can say at this stage is that security certifications from industry bodies around SD-WAN are still in the early stages of being approved and documented. Vendors are submitting their products for certification and standards, but it takes a reasonably long time for approvals. That said, we believe it is still a good idea to document any specific security requirements like these and consult vendors around roadmaps, even if the answers are not available right now. Bringing together all of the requirements from these four categories into a single document is a very important step in the process towards SD-WAN adoption. A requirements document provides clarity on what needs to be delivered technically, what the business expects operationally and commercially, and is something that anyone in any team can refer back to when questions are raised later down the line about why certain decisions were made. In other words, we see the document as a living document. Your business evolves, and we think the requirements document should too. Such as in the case of an acquisition, where you would want to consider some new potential requirements and how they align with those at the start of the project. The requirements document should be fundamental to your vendor selection process. Teneo uses requirements documents to perform analysis against vendor capabilities, producing scores in various categories to determine suitability of that vendor for any potential project. We've learned that this is not as straightforward as it might seem, and this is where experience really counts. We've seen customers trying to do this independently, where their information is based on vendor marketing material and data sheets, dialogue with the vendor sales rep, and perhaps visits to trade shows and blog articles online. The sources of information are abundant, but actually, using the technology hands-on, as we do at Teneo, is the best way to determine capabilities and makes the analysis phase more accurate and meaningful. Teneo has invested in technology and run a number of SD-WAN vendors in our lab. This allows our SD-WAN team to have constant access to the technologies and new features, which, coupled with actual customer deployment experience around the globe, puts us in a very strong position to take your requirements and make recommendations for vendor selection based on real-world experience and deep insight into the technology. We see that this can bring a huge benefit to your organization, as we will save you time by helping you focus on the right vendors and ensure any investment in SD-WAN is based on the vendor that best fits the requirements. So, as I have mentioned vendors a fair amount, let's take a look at the vendor landscape next. The first thing to note is that this is a very crowded market, with over 60 vendors claiming to have an SD-WAN solution. Of these vendors, 19 have been recognized in the Gartner Magic Quadrant released in October of 2019, of which 2 were subsequently acquired by other vendors, CloudGenix by Palo Alto and Silver Peak by Aruba HPE. One thing is for sure, we'll continue to see more consolidation in this market through both acquisition and niche players struggling to get enough of a foothold to sustain their operations or sadly go out of business. Our experience of working with 5 SD-WAN vendors over the last few years and analysis of many more through our global SD-WAN practice has taught us that whilst there are many similarities around features and outcomes, there are both subtle and significant differences which sometimes are easy to miss. This is why the requirements document process and working with a partner with experience is important, as I mentioned earlier. But additionally, it is important to recognize and classify the vendors themselves, as this can help with the vendor selection process. So when Teneo talks about SD-WAN vendors, we recognize 3 categories as shown in the slide. Pure play vendors are focused on SD-WAN with strong technical alliances and no other legacy lines of business. NAS, or Network as a Service, combines security, SD-WAN, and private circuits. Network and security are heritage vendors in these areas, developing and adding SD-WAN capabilities organically or via acquisition. Understanding the implications of these classifications is very important for a number of reasons. For example, NAS vendors such as Ariaka and Cato Networks might favor a customer who's looking for a single vendor to take ownership of the network and the security. But they may not have some or all of the advanced SD-WAN features you could find in pure-play vendors such as Versa, Silver Peak, or VeloCloud, which could be essential to meet your requirements. Note the latter 2 were both acquired and would now fall into the network and security category. Then there are the traditional network and security vendors such as Cisco, Fortinet, and Palo Alto. Cisco expanded their SD-WAN capabilities by acquiring pure-play vendor Viptela, as did Palo Alto by acquiring CloudGenix. Fortinet added SD-WAN capabilities into their portfolio, where they can leverage a huge global install base, but are not focused exclusively on SD-WAN development. This could mean that whilst they have an integrated offering, which could appeal to some, feature availability could be behind those in the pure play category. The other factor we consider is around acquisition. Whether the SD-WAN vendor was a recent acquisition or a likely acquisition target is for some very important, and indeed for Teneo something we feel worthy of consideration. We have first-hand experience of the vendor acquisition process causing a level of disruption, which, depending on where you are in the process, can be invisible to your project or damaging. What I've just been talking about leads me nicely into the less obvious things that we always try and encourage thought and discussion on with our customers. I mentioned the vendor classification being important, and that has implications around their focus, development cycles, funding, acquisitions, and vendor partnerships and integrations, just to name a few. But what about the assistance that you'll seek from a partner to help you define your solution, then help deliver the project and potentially support it? Are they specialized in SD-WAN? And do they have the necessary technical experience in networking to undertake a network transformation project such as this? Do they have their own facilities to test new features before you roll them out? Do they have strong relationships with their chosen vendors, which they can prove? Have they inherited SD-WAN in their sales portfolio because their strategic vendor purchased an SD-WAN vendor? My point here is that the incumbent VMware reseller, who's great at selling you servers, storage, and virtualization technology, may have very limited skills in networking to be able to deliver a VeloCloud solution, which will now be on the menu of options to sell from VMware's portfolio. And then there are carriers. Love or hate them, every business has a partnership with a circuit provider, and all of these service providers today, if not already, are looking to partner with one or more SD-WAN vendor to incorporate them as part of their offering. But why is this? And is this even a good idea for your business? This is a topic for a future conversation. What I will say is that we recognize that there is a degree of appeal for the circuit provider taking ownership of the SD-WAN overlay, if nothing else but for convenience. However, large carriers tend to be less flexible when it comes to design options, as just one example. So it's imperative that you assess your requirements against not just their chosen vendor, but also the ways in which you can deploy and consume that technology. Finally, it's often written that SD-WAN enables a business to gain more visibility and control of their network, with the carrier simply providing the underlying transport, leaving the intelligence and control in your hands. Ask yourself this question: does choosing a carrier to deliver your SD-WAN solution seem like letting them mark their own homework? This is a frequent topic of conversation for Teneo and its customers, and one that we would stress merits careful consideration. Hopefully what I've run through highlights that there are many things to consider, and that capturing the right information early on in the process will be a major factor in delivering a successful SD-WAN solution. Having a defined process avoids things being missed, which is why Teneo has been developing and following a process for our customers for some time now, starting with SD-WAN workshops and requirements gathering exercises. We recognize that an engagement with us can start with the business right at the very beginning of their journey into SD-WAN, or it can start with those who have already had some exposure to this market and may be further ahead, perhaps even where they have captured key requirements. In any case, Teneo has a process and methodology where we can join forces with you to accelerate your investigations and move you safely through each stage. As Teneo has a history in WAN optimization, network and application performance monitoring, and security, we are very well placed to take these other technology areas and apply them to the SD-WAN discussion. This can help you define a solution where all of these elements inevitably will come together. Our process and the documentation we create with you will explain the options considered, the decisions made, the objectives and the goals of the project, and help anyone from any part of the organization answer the question, why are we doing this? And should you end up with a business case that supports an investment in SD-WAN, Teneo is able to continue on that journey with you through the design, deployment, and support phases of your project, utilizing a global team of experienced solution architects, engineers, and our 24/7/365 global NOC. And my final note is specific to the requirements document. It's not shelfware and should be something that anyone can always refer back to during the project lifecycle and beyond. It should not be a static document, and it should not be something that IT keeps to itself. Share it with the business and seek their input. When a vendor releases a new feature, consider the requirements document and whether the feature is needed, or whether it could impact another requirement. Validate the requirements you capture. It is an iterative process. Once the translation from business requirements to technical requirements has been completed, the project team should be focused on and continually assess whether the technical requirement can be delivered. If something changes, the issue needs to be taken back to the project stakeholders and a decision made as to whether it is an issue or not, and whether a new technical requirement needs to be documented. This is hopefully not an epiphany for any of you, but Sometimes it is worth remembering that the value in these documents still exists beyond the point at which the budget is awarded to start the project. Thank you for your time today. If you have any follow-up questions about anything covered in this video, please contact me directly or any of us here at Teneo.